Hi, I'm Jeremy Crosby.
And I'm Nick Boucher. We're your hosts for the program that's all about your city, Talking Fitchburg.
Every weekday, we pull together the news, events, and information you need to stay on top of what's happening in the city of Fitchburg.
Find Talking Fitchburg on cable TV, Roku, Amazon Fire, Apple TV, and our live stream on the web. Plus, you can find all our headlines and stories on Facebook, YouTube, and our video on demand service. This is your city.
Keep up with Talking Fitchburg and the issues affecting you and your neighbors.
Want to know what's happening in your city? Get Notify Me messages from the City of Fitchburg. Visit fitchburgwi.gov on your computer or mobile device and select the big Notify Me button on the left. Enter your email and/or phone number, whichever is best for you to get notifications. Scroll down the list and select all the topics you're interested in to receive email or text messages about. You'll be notified every time one of your topics is updated. Sign up for Notify Me, one more way to keep up with your Fitchburg government.
Stoner Prairie neighborhood plan. So I'll just run through what's on the agenda for tonight. We have we'll have space for public comment. We have a presentation, and then we'll have review and discuss of the draft plan that was sent out or that was released a few weeks ago. And then at the end, what we're hoping for is a recommendation whether to move this plan forward to the Plan Commission and the adoption process by the steering committee. So that being said, the original agenda had the public comment first. Is anybody here? Do you actually want to speak?
I would prefer to be able to do it afterwards.
Okay. Okay. We'll do it after then. So I'll kick it over to Steve to do the presentation.
Thanks, Brad. Happy New Year. That's last time we met was
right
before, we had the open house in December, which was not well attended. Mostly part of that was the weather. Let's see who's going to move forward for me. So if you did go online, you would have gotten a recording that I did of that open house presentation that was going to be held that night. There were some faces I see here there, but we didn't actually hold anything because there wasn't much really public there. But yes, we'll go updates to the plan and new sections through the full adoption of the plan. We'll have questions and potential next steps of recommendations and what follows that. I will note on, if you have recommendations, you can have that included in your recommendation of edits. I would ask that they be more substantive content changes. We could always have grammatical or formatting that you might have caught provided to Brad. But I'm looking to catch really the bigger things that are important for approval. So the document's kind of laid out into 4 chapters. Chapter 1, background and engagement summary. There's an asterisk there that in deciding through this plan and the other plan we're working on that we want to house the full content and summaries of all the process on the City Fitchburg website. And so it's brief in the plan, but the intent and it's explained that it is going to be available through the city website under planning and zoning. Chapter 2, policies are really going to guide decisions on development proposals. Chapter 3 is documenting the concept development we've gone through, including establishing a preferred concept and desired design themes within that concept. And Chapter 4 is looking at how infrastructure would be impacted as presented in the preferred concept and ultimately by the policy map, future land use map. So I want to talk a little bit about updates. So again, this was the vision statement. South Stoner Prairie will develop as a complete neighborhood that creates diverse and affordable housing options, expands job opportunities, facilitates sustainable design and development practices, and promotes social equity.
I just thought of something. Since Craig is here standing in for Clint with Payne and Dolan, I don't know if he knows anyone or if anybody has met him, so we probably should go around quick and do introductions and the role that we're serving on the steering committee. So Craig, why don't you go ahead and start on Zoom, and then we'll go around the room here.
Sure. Thanks for having me as stand in to Clint. I'm Craig Dodsley with Payne and Nolan. Been heavily involved in the Fitchburg Minerals work and O'Brien Payne and Nolan. A licensed engineer and land surveyor and manage their engineering consulting business unit.
Thanks, Craig. I'm Brad Sipple. I am a planner with the city of Fitchburg. Maybe we'll just go over.
Sure. Steve Trellman with MSA, working on the consultant side of this plan.
Jason Valerius, Executive Director at the Capital Area Regional Planning Commission.
Al Brzak, I'm with Edgewood College.
Robin Loder with Fitchburg Hills, Yarmouth Hills.
And Carol Poole, City of Fitchburg Plan Commission representative.
And we've got 3 resident members that are not here tonight as well.
Within the plan, there's goals and strategies kind of based on these 5 topics: housing, mobility, economy, quality of life, sustainability. We went through this previously, has been shared through the public process. Just highlighting a few modifications that's happened through working with staff that's in red text. So under 1.3, it says, concentrate high-density residential and mixed-use developments along primary corridors to support future sustainable public transit routes or route. Otherwise, nothing else changed. Under mobility, 2.1, it's basically expanding what said county to greater Dane County area when we're looking at convenient and connected multimodal transportation system and linking the neighborhood to the greater area. And then under 2.3, discourage cul-de-sac and dead-end streets in favor of connected streets that provide transportation flexibility. Under economy, 3.2, promote commercial business park areas compatible with the density and scale. So it was previously just scale of surrounding development, or screen to the extent practical. Under quality of life, 4.2, plan parks that vary in size and facilities to fulfill ranging neighborhood recreational interest, including creating a large park to serve as an area or community park, consistent with the Fitchburg POSP, which is outdoor space plan. Five, sustainability. Under 5.1, it just adds active and passive recreation. Under protecting and restoring the environment can include the active and passive recreation, public gathering, or flood protection, stormwater management. 5.2 adds preserve existing tree canopy to the extent possible to include woodlands that will not be quarried. So I can pause. Was there anything that of comment of those minor edits to those policies? Okay. So with the future land use map, basically this is what we landed on, and with a slight modification from our last meeting. So this was discussed and determined that the coming in off collector A from the west, we'll show mouse here. This became NMU, which is neighborhood mixed use. Previously, most of that was left as open space with the assumption was necessary for stormwater management. Based on our analysis, that was no longer necessary. So that was what was determined in this group last time. But just noting that this is the policy map. So if this was adopted, it'd be into the comp plan and be part of that amendment. So currently, this area is just shown as existing land uses. This would then be modified to show this potential pattern. So if land use proposals for development or rezoning, this would be part of that decision-making, looking at this future land use map by the categories, the neighborhood plans, goals and strategy we just went through, and consideration of the preferred concept themes that are in chapter 3. And again, this future land use map does show flex area off of Commerce Park and Lacey Road. This hatching portion right here is that discussion that we had last time that the preference and desire is for business park in that area. However, if that earth wall, meaning that those two properties are in that black line, have to maintain the current conditions, and tying it back in, you're creating a vertical wall. And that's not conducive for business park, especially on Fitchburg Hills site. So if that earth wall were to come down, preference is business park, otherwise high density residential is the use. Go ahead.
I'm just wondering if staff would be willing to comment on kind of where the line is between, so when someone comes forward to develop, their ideas and their engineering concepts are probably going to vary from this a bit. And the amount of that variation, at some point you reach that point where you say this isn't compatible with the plan anymore. Anything you could offer is sort of how you handle that?
Have we run into that in the past during your tenure here?
There's in the past what we've done is in certain areas. I mean, okay, so if you're shifting between future land uses minorly, I wouldn't have a big problem with that. We have in the past, like with the Anton Drive plan, we've actually written in, and I was thinking about that as we were looking at this, written in that into the plan that those lines can shift a bit. And even so far as to eliminate a particular land use if and when additional buffers were put in place. So I think you have a good question. And
I know it's not an easy thing to handle.
In general, we approach it as a pretty hard line in the past.
Maybe just my thought now is maybe we should have a number in there, like 1%, if it exceeds 1% or 5%. I don't know what the number should be, but.
And I especially look at the one-way pair, that unusual street configuration, which I think actually would be a very interesting and kind of placemaking feature of the neighborhood. But if property owner developer comes forward with a conventional street there, are you looking for that same amount of open space to one side or the other instead of what we've got here?
I would say no, because it would be a different, we would want to still keep the street wall, and I wouldn't expect to have that same amount of open space with the main. But the stormwater would have to be addressed.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I say. The clarification is majority of that is planned to be for stormwater management.
Sure, which has to go somewhere.
Yeah.
And preserving the woodlands that are in that portion, which was something we discussed with CARPC in a meeting. Is there is old growth there. The question will be the health at the time of development, but that consideration is, I'll call it out here. So that was one other modification we did previously, was this became preserved. Then there was a discussion about this portion of it could be preserved as well within that. So this becomes a lighter touch through that area. But the rest of it was assumed to be stormwater, so that has to go somewhere. So that's just clarification there.
Thank you.
And the last bullet here is about the roadway network, that it is presenting that Commerce Park Drive would extend through the neighborhood, potentially to Grandview at some point. And then we have these two parallels to Lacey, Collector A and then Collector B, of running through with the intent to go from Fitch-Rona ultimately over to Seminole Highway. As we discussed previously, there's two versions of that. Ideally, it's more direct, but now let me go there. More direct, but that currently would go through a solar farm. So the alternative is shown here, and either option can be decided when development is proposed and what the conditions are at that time. And again, commenting that these roads that we're presenting here in this future land use map, the idea is that connect A and B, the edges of that study area, they can fluctuate of how it actually meanders through the development. So previously, I believe it was in our November, December submittal, on the packet, we had design guidelines presented. We did not go over them within the meeting, so I did want to hit on that. The application of this is that it would be for non-residential and multifamily, and I want to make clear this is the idea that this is an encouragement. These portions of list is codified, in my sense, is more encouragement of guidelines compared to the stuff we talked about earlier in this meeting about policies. This is encouragement. So eco-sustainable design, architectural and design, parking, screening, and landscaping. I listed some of the elements that were discussed in that. I did want to hit a little bit more on compatibility guidelines that was in there. So this is where you're looking at the issue of having some density changes between buildings that are 3-story or larger, next to single-family duplex and smaller townhomes and multifamily. So some of those comments are, consider if there's multiple buildings, locate the least intensive character nearest those abutting lower intensity developments. Building height come down to 35 feet within 60 feet of single family duplex lots, and come down to 35 feet within 30 feet of other low intensity uses, listed townhomes, multifamily. Providing gables, dormers, and other change in the roof line at intervals equal to the average width of those high intensity lots. It seems it's wordy, but basically if across the street you have single family and they're 60-foot lots, average, you should break up that plane every 60 feet at least.
So when we talk about those measurements, are we talking about lot line to lot line, or are we talking actual physical building to physical building?
Lot line to lot line.
Okay.
For the comparison of what that increment of change should happen at.
Thank you.
Yep. That's the same thing with, I think I skipped one, varying building plane setback. So that's the horizontal portion of it,
yeah,
changing in that interval. 6 to 12 to 12 to 12 roof pitch, and preference for individual units on the street level for multifamily versus one entry point with a hallway. That creates a new character and play with the street.
And that's not, in general, that's where you're trying to establish compatibility with lower density.
Correct.
Yeah, I like that one.
Any comments on this? There is imagery that goes with this within the plan, but I just wanted to hit on the main points. So with land use concepts, this is again a disclaimer about what it is and what it's not. So again, this is a long-term vision. It's supporting identity, character, and design parameters, and identifying infrastructure needs to best serve the neighborhood. That's the primary focus of what we're creating with this preferred concept. So we did go through, this is blocking a little bit. Let's see if I can move that. Or is that on my end? Maybe not. Is that on my end? Well, kind of see it. Basically, we did look a little bit more about each future land use category has a range of units per acre. And we were, throughout this process, saying we're looking at the low to more of like the midpoint, not all the way to the high. Because the reality is, if you look at this entire neighborhood, you're not going to see it develop to the high throughout. And so generally, we're looking at that midpoint number. So that's 50 for high density residential, 14.5 for the medium high density residential, 7 for medium, 3.5 for low, and then neighborhood mixed use at 25 units per acre. So that's up in the top right if you didn't catch where I was pulling that from. Ultimately, that gets to us of this neighborhood building out to roughly 1,250 units up to 3,200 units within this area per this future land use map. It's broken out also by property owners, and again, there's that flex area, so it has some variability there. And so when we look at that variability, we're looking purely if it's all business park or if it's all high density residential in those numbers. So again, this is partly of what we're pulling from this map is some of these design themes are listed. So the connection piece. So I have a little disclaimer in the bottom right, it's cut off a little bit. Oh, there you go. Just noting again that there's additional streets shown in this concept compared to the future land use map. That is not suggesting that that's how it should be laid out. We're presenting an option how it fits. Those collector roads are labeled, those are the ones that need to exist. And ultimately, so we need A and B to run through. A, there's this red text, that's something that was added from the previous review of this, noting that optimizing safety, we're lining up collector A with Tonto Trail, which is to the west, which is in the town. Final location of this intersection may be altered due to proximity or crossing of the intermittent stream that runs.
Right where it is.
Yeah, well, it's right through here, yeah. It's likely just a farmland ditch, but we're just putting that disclaimer there. If it is deemed navigable waterway by DNR, a disturbance will require a DNR permit. Commerce Park Drive, just noting that it's going to go all the way through the neighborhood, and collector C and D are additional north-south streets to provide more mobility. Density, noting that higher density developments concentrated along major collectors. Neighborhood mixed use areas, which is the dots, create a more gradual transition between busy external roads to lower density areas. We've noted in the current comp plan, neighborhood mixed use says it allows for individual residential buildings that they may be permitted through a development plan. We're recommending, in what we've been describing this whole time, is that flexibility of that neighborhood mixed use. So our recommendation is to allow it by right if you meet the certain aspects we wrote in the plan that would be met, that would fit that on page 44. Talked about that flex area that preferred is to have their wall removed with larger business park area. Should it remain that wall? HDR is a plausible scenario. And collector A is required to connect. So even if that wall remains, this entire area we talked about that collector A needs to find its way east-west through the neighborhood. So some of that wall would have to come down. Proposed.
Can you go back to?
Yes. Yep.
This is Craig. Can you go back 2 slides for me? Just want to read that flexibility statement once more for Clint. One more back. Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Sure. Other discussion item we've had throughout this process, at one point the school was presented in where there is business park. Through the process, there was interest in seeing jobs here, also to serve the neighborhood and the surrounding area, and there's a need for it. So we looked at one point that the school would be to the west, which is outside the neighborhood. We have had discussions with the school district of what their criteria of a location. They had interest in this potential neighborhood if it had enough units, which we have beyond what they were looking for. Those criteria is here. So while the concept and design theme describes this proposed elementary school as desired, alternative locations meeting the school district's criteria could be considered. That's that red text up there. On the future lands map, that is not shown at all. Any comments on that?
Is there an option that the school would not be there as well? I mean, is it expected that there will be a school, end of discussion, or?
No, I mean, it's up to both parties to decide this is the right location on the school side, and they come to an agreement.
Okay, so there doesn't have to be a school on this plan?
Does not. Does the interest of the neighborhood plan per discussion overall, the whole committee,
Yep.
This is a complete neighborhood that could have that walkability of an elementary school.
I just wanted to check, because I know some of the landowners were worried about that, because obviously school districts don't pay what the market pays for land.
Sure.
So,
You know, we can't compel it, but if thinking back to the beginning of the process and the conversation about what would or would not justify a school, I think we've hit a number of units.
I'm not saying I'm against a school, I'm
Yeah,
just saying that, you know,
But-
sometimes that gets contentious when you get into these development wars, so. I just
Yeah,
wanna
so the
make
wording's
sure.
in that top, if there's any concern of how it's written, that's what was added in the supplement you received a couple days ago.
Right. And an alternative location could even include across Fitchburg Road in the Tonto area where there
It's not saying alternative location in the neighborhood, it's saying an alternative location.
Perfect, thank you.
Parks and open space and trails, you see in the lower right, that's both on which is the concept. We also have it on the future land use map showing existing, which is the solid red line, and the proposed potential routing if this was the road network. And noting that off-road trails can connect residents to Quarry Ridge Park, primary neighborhood park, and follow the east-west connections on Collector A. We described this last time, the parkland dedication requires 2,900 square feet per unit, or fee in lieu of. The full build-out, as presented in the concept, comes again to about 1,250 to 3,170 residents, which would require 84 to 211 acres. In this entire neighborhood, we're showing 37.4. That's excluding stormwater management, that's not included in that number. And in discussion with staff, that is not atypical of a scenario that's been described, that you want to maintain the parks you do have to a good level, so you don't want to oversaturate a specific neighborhood. So that's up for discussion, but I'm showing you the breakdown on the image on the right of the property owners of how much is shown in each. Notably on the Wolf property, there are some steep slopes that may exist, and so that's 6.8 plus 5.8 potentially, but some of that is related to not ideal for development. Again, this is conceptual, this is not a requirement of either of these owners. It's just presented how it's shown throughout the neighborhood.
I'll add to that, just to bring it back to the context of the FUTA, it's about, about 280 acres. So the high end of the requirement's almost the entire area.
And also shows the walking shed that you see based on the size and the type of park. There's usually a certain standard of where you could walk to it, and you can see that it's covered entirely. There is an assumption maybe there's a park in the lands outside of this development area, but that's not what's really creating our connections of saying everything's being covered. There's that little gap if that park didn't exist. But as we talked about the school, the ideal is that there's a school and park so that they can have less land required of that and use it for both purposes, general public and the school.
Brief sideline outside of the scope of this plan, that the amount of land that could be required by the number of units here, obviously outstripping the land, is that, are you rethinking, or is there reason to rethink the land requirement versus the improvement requirement? I think where you're headed is more intensive use of a smaller amount of land and more budget to improvements than to land. Is that a fair kind of encapsulation of?
Yes, that's an action item of the Park and Open Space Plan. Okay. So yes.
And where that direction goes, I'm not sure. I mean, the city also needs to balance the new stuff you put in and the long-term maintenance and replacement too. There's a lot to think through here, but we recognize the amount of land.
So this had been presented before, so this is newer, looking at just phasing, and this is based on discussion with landowners, timing of necessary infrastructure, and expected market demand for new lots. The build out is 5 to 20, I should probably put a plus on that, but 5 to 20 years. Phase 1 is assumed currently that the CUP expiring on number 1 and end of 28 and transitioning to active development. Phase 2A, and there's a 2A and there's 2B because that's really tied to infrastructure. So 2A can happen if development happens to the north, lands outside this neighborhood. 2B is tied to likely to phase 1 connection through Commerce Park Drive. And then there's this phase 3, which is currently areas that are purple that are been quarried, or they have equipment and facilities related to the quarry operation. So it's more of a long-term redevelopment. And then areas south of there, including the Wolf property, which may be quarried potentially down the road before development. So that's why you're seeing this breakout. Into engineering. There wasn't any really changes to this portion of it. We presented this last time. There's kind of like this divide east and west, pretty much based on even that wall and the property owners. So all this is funneling west. There is a portion in the business park up here that is treated and would run through the assumed development that's been presented in the past and served here and then to the north. On the eastern side, this has a little bit higher requirements because ultimately when it exits the site, it goes to closed depressions. So that has a higher, the things you see in orange on here are increases from what's required to the west. So their size based on these requirements. So ultimately when this does go ultimately for an amendment, these standards are what is the key part of what's being approved in that expansion, and that's going to be pushed on to developers to meet that requirement.
I want to add something too on the south end of that.
Yep.
Those orange arrows, because there was a question about this after the last meeting. Those orange arrows are showing the direction of the existing drainage. It would be expected that with the stormwater management that's put into this neighborhood, that would be better than what it is now. There are runoff issues there now, and yeah, it would be expected to be improved through this development.
For that clarification. Sanitary design, this is obviously, there's a lot of numbers on here, but we're kind of determining kind of the key pieces was using 80 gallons per day per person, which is standard, has been in the past 100. I think we talked about this where the state has looked at it and the number is more like 56. So we're still being conservative at 80, we brought that down. But the intent is to gravity serve this entire development and try to not to exceed 30 feet in depth of the pipe from ground. There is a potential alternative connection that we talked at the end of our process with staff, not with you, that's shown on the bottom right of just another way that might lower the depths from that business park area to the south. So that's not in the numbers that's presented here, but ultimately there's this divide again of sanitary, similarly as we talked about that the two property owners can connect to separate pipes and are not tied to each other. And there is potential, we looked at, if there's capacity down there on the pipe, it might be upsized or another connection. The areas in red that you're seeing south of the neighborhood could potentially be connected through that green pipe that is shown here and runs over to the west. So previously we discussed how we were using the midpoint of the density ranges we talked about. I did want to take a step back, and that's why you have that supplement information, and the way I've revised it is looking at, we don't know ultimately what the plan from a developer is going to be, but we do know what density ranges are allowed per what the future land use map shows. So I wanted to at least look at the lowest density level. Can the pipe connection fit into the capacity? So if we're looking on the east side here, which is the blue outline in that little exhibit, the allowable capacity is 0.961 CFS. That's the peak flow. That includes a reserve of 30% of that pipe for lands north of Lacey. So the lowest density range through the east will be 0.645 to 0.77 CFS. So that fits within that allowable capacity, but again, that allows for 530 to 690 units, not the higher number, which you see that midpoint number we used is 1,200 to 1,650. That would push the peak flow up to 1.361 to 1.75. And just for reference, if there was no reserve on that pipe for the north part of Lacey, the number is 1.153. So this is still above that number. So there would be a potential need to service from another pipe or through neighboring lands to go above that lower density range. Any questions on that?
Through neighboring lands, meaning that you would take it to the west?
Plausible or further east. I think there was discussion of working even with Edward College.
my question about going west is that chunk to the west is, I think, the first phase, right? And the decisions we made about that prior to decisions about this area.
Well, they have a plan for outside the neighborhood, you're talking about in the corner there.
Mm-hmm.
But nothing's been brought forth for it.
But I mean, part of this study area too, it wasn't, do I remember correctly in the phasing, that phase one is?
This is phase one.
This is phase one, thank you.
Within the neighborhood.
So I don't remember correctly. Yeah, all right, thank you.
Any other questions?
Does it depend whether the intensity and type of manufacturing or any kind of commercial use in the park?
Yeah, we're generalizing, and so all that's impactful, and even to what
So
density,
the flex
right?
area ended up being residential versus commercial.
Well, that's what we're showing, I should mention. There's an option A and B on the screen.
Yep.
So the A is if it was all high-density residential.
Yep.
The B is if it's no residential in that flex and it's all business park.
Yep.
So that's that range I gave of 0.65 to 7.7.
Yep.
But you see there's certain assumed people per unit by a density type.
Yep.
So a lot of this is a lot of mathing, and there are errors and there are ups and downs, but this is generally good practice numbers to evaluate this time.
Is this, do we consider this to be in any way policy, or is this an estimate if 5 years down the road you're actually developing this and there's an opinion that we don't have to stick to 80, if the average is 56, we could be using a lower number and really handle more units?
I would say the idea of this is to determine the feasibility, and if we can use lower metrics and it's still within the density that.
So this is a tool to use, it is not a policy set.
I think this is a tool, and we will have even better data as we go forward, and our utility team can look at what data uses are for data that we have, and we could always make some modifications that's more reasonable for the public taxpayer.
Yeah.
Any other comments, questions? And there's the west side. So there, we've discussed previously, there's two options, but one might be a little harder to achieve right now, which is the MMSD extending, which is the number 2. That would be, it's impactful because it needs to go through town lands that wouldn't connect to it. It's not been designed, and there's a current development that may go in where that 2 is. So there's some complications to making that connection work at this time. Number 1 is to the Fitchburg Road, and noting there's 1.163 CFS sewer capacity, but we also estimated what is planned for Quarry Vista neighborhood, which is north of Lacey, as well as that subdivision that we have outlined there that's not in the neighborhood, that has that lower density. That would take 0.446 base our estimate currently. So that leaves a remaining of 0.716. So also we'll go through some of the numbers, but it would require probably upgrading that pipe at some point to do a full build out, and it still won't likely meet all portions on the west.
In terms of routing there, does the routing of pipes that goes up through the area that's white and not part of the neighborhood, is that all gravity flow? Or does that require a lift station in there?
Probably a lift station. There's a big hill through there.
Okay.
And our utility team definitely wants gravity wherever possible, but the depth that would be needed to go through there probably is costly. It's something our utility team is working through right now.
So again, here on this table 4.1 is the idea of looking at just, if you took the lower density range for all those, it would come to 0.915, which is about 720 units. That exceeds that 7.16. So I'm noting that if the current capacity of the pipe, if the areas we included that don't develop where it's actually not developed to the level we're showing for areas outside of, that's upstream, then maybe it gets closer to meeting that requirement at the low range. Anyone follow me on that or question that? So if we took out 0.44 of that 1.163, so if that was inaccurate of looking at what is happening, like does that neighborhood actually, does that subdivision actually go in north of this area or not? But otherwise, a service needs to be provided from another location. Water main layout, I will note that this table has been revised from what you even received. So that number of 483,000 average flows is below the numbers we have provided previously. We were requested to use the 2018 water report, and so it was about the metric and how we calculated that. But generally, the sizing still holds where we're talking about 12-inch for Commerce Park and Collector C, 10-inch for Collector A, Business Park and Multifamily Residential, and 8-inch for lower density residential. No extensions to Fitchburg, to the neighborhood to the west, yeah. And no need for other water infrastructure, well or reservoir. Traffic, no real change on this, as we talked before, that Commerce Park and Lacey would require a controlled intersection, meaning either roundabout or signal when full build out happens, and preference from staff at this time is a roundabout. There'll be a roundabout going in at Fitchburg and Lacey. Then the other cloud you see on Collector A and Fitchburg, that one did not meet the warrants for a controlled intersection, but notably there was going to be some delays at certain turning movements. But we talked through the issue of putting controlled there would create conflicts potentially, people waiting and trying to bust through if you actually put a controlled intersection there. There was a bunch of recommendations in the plan now. A lot of it's kind of baked in already into some of the routing of trails that we've shown, but noting that roundabout, we just talked about T1, T2, left turn lane to Fitchburg to Collector A, T3, bike lanes on Commerce Park, Collector A's and B, 4, extend Commerce Park Drive down, 5, consider expansion of the bus service to accommodate existing and new residential business development in the area. Bus service could also link South Stone Prairie to Fitch Hatchery Road Rapid Transit. 6, consider a multi-use trail to connect to Badger State Trail and existing North Stoner Prairie neighborhood trail. 7, work with the school district to provide an internal circulation system that provides safe routes to school for adjacent grade school and middle school with considerations for additional connections. 8, extend Collector A from the limits to Seminole Highway. Evaluate adding a roundabout intersection as appropriate to Fitchburg to Seminole Highway. 9, develop advance southward along Seminole Highway, extend the trail, Badger State Trail connections to intersect the South Stoner Prairie neighborhood internal trail. And 10, consider installation of advisory bike lanes or sharrows on local roads where lower speeds and traffic volumes to encourage road sharing. Any comments on that? Questions? Hearing none. So that is updating on the plan. What would remain is potential recommendation from this committee that would then go to referral to committees and commissions for review with staff attending those. Presentation at Plan Commission, public hearing at Plan Commission, and council public hearing and adoption. And that process could be running us out to August, September, October, but decisions have to be made on that process timing. That's the presentation. I appreciate everyone's time. I know this process has been stop and go at times. I think we've created a good plan with some good design themes and considerations. but open to go back and look at anything we just presented as you deliberate if you want to make a consideration.
Thank you, I think it looks great.
We should.
I really do. Yeah. I think we did what some have not done in surrounding cities, which is to make sure that we're building density in a livable place. And keeping an eye to making sure that we're not making it all too dense, and that where we have it dense makes sense, and we're still going to scale things and keep it livable. I just worry about, you know, some of this density that's going in other places, and it looks oppressive when you drive through it. And sometimes when you view it from the satellite maps, when you look on Google, you can't tell if it's a residential neighborhood or an industrial park. And I think this neighborhood will not have that problem. This looks great.
Yeah, the intermix of types of housing, I think, is good. It's a good neighborhood in its theoretical form.
Yeah, who knows what it'll end up being like, 30 years from now. But and it is good to have, just after being on Plan Commission for so long. I'm sorry, I have horrible headaches from not speaking very well, but just seeing as these plans age on the shelf, having that flexibility and the suggestiveness in it versus the hard line stuff, you minimize the number of times you have to do a comp plan amendment to get something done. And it saves the developer time and money, it saves staff time, just an unbelievable amount of time. And it speeds up the process. I mean, we've given a clear vision for what we want. A developer's gonna come in, look at our comp plan and say, hey, I'm thinking about buying some land down here. What do they wanna do with it? And if they can go look at this plan and go, hey, you know what we wanna do makes sense. And I think we have good grounds for an argument by looking at where we've laid flexibility in the plan, makes them more amenable to coming in and not trying to present something that we don't want, but coming in with something that maybe we can be, if we need to be flexible, they know where we're willing to be flexible. So I think it helps in the future.
And we just need to figure out how to get the rest of the region putting this much thought and effort into planning before it's in front of them immediately.
Thanks, Jason. Were there any big things that anyone noticed in the plan, if you had a chance to review, that we didn't cover in the presentation that need discussion? Okay, maybe now is a good time to open it up if you all want to speak. And if you do want to speak, it'd be best if you come to the table so that the camera and mics can pick you up better.
Well, I want to thank everybody for working really hard on it. It looks like actually a reasonable plan. And I had a chance to look in as much detail as I might otherwise want to, but from an overview perspective, it seems like it's a well thought out balanced layout. So my primary issues fall under two categories. One is environmental issues. So the fact is that the discharge, stormwater discharges are going to discharge into wetlands. And it's going to discharge into waterways that already are impaired for phosphorus. So that means that you're going to have to satisfy the criteria for NR 103, and we'll be pushing hard on that. I will use the documentation that was developed by the town of Dunn for Terravesa, and also the new MS4 permits should be coming out one of these days. And there's been a complete redoing of the standards with regard to discharges into impaired creeks and waterways. So it's called the MS4 remand rule. And basically the courts have decided, federal courts, which don't typically decide things in favor of environment, that there's too much leeway given to cities to define their own processes, and they don't conform to the necessary provisions for discrete, defined, measurable processes and plans. And so it's going to become much more difficult to discharge any stormwater runoff that causes a net increase in total phosphorus into U-verse. So that's something to keep in mind. The other thing that needs to be done is there needs to be an existing, I think that the Regional Planning Commission needs to step up on this. I think that as a general statement, given all the development that's occurred, certainly not to the level of intensity that's going on now, but certainly over the last 10 or 15 years, modulo the 2008 to 2013, that there needs to be surveys of existing water quality issues within all the major watersheds, and that certainly is one of those that qualifies. There's been a tremendous amount of development there, and all the aggregation of stormwater plans that I've put into different computer programs show that there's been a massive increase in the total volume of stormwater runoff that hits that watershed, and that's problematic. So I think that the Regional Planning Commission needs to step up on that. I think that the Regional Planning Commission needs to step up on, I just found that you redid the environmental corridor this year, great, and I've been perusing it, but one of the things that I've had an issue with on some other projects is that there is a requirement that the environmental functions within environmental corridors are not degraded, and that in the larger context, particularly groundwater functions that contribute to the functions of the things that are in environmental corridors, the streams, the wetlands, the riparian areas, that those not be degraded. The only thing that Regional Planning Commission has is a very short checklist saying don't do these things, but it doesn't have any more discussion of, one, how the Regional Planning Commission evaluates those impacts when an application is brought before the Regional Planning Commission. That definitely needs to be fleshed out, because otherwise what's going to happen is get to there and somebody like me pulls out the NR 103, which is very rigorous. It says that the burden of proof for non-impact to wetland functions is on the proposer of the project, which means the city. And the city goes, okay, now how do we do this, right? And so if you have it, and if the Regional Planning Commission has a set of criteria that sort of incorporates aspects of NR 103 where wetlands will be affected, that gives prior notice to municipalities so that they can plan in advance of getting hit at the time the amendment gets submitted, and then there's potential for delay. So that's an issue. So everybody should be aware also, interestingly enough, and I know that you are, that the only criteria that in the end, it's the DNR is allowed to use as the approval criteria for amending the Dane County Water Quality Plan to increase the urban services area is whether or not, and it's odd language, that the water quality standards that are applicable and that will be impacted by stormwater discharges and other activities will be satisfied. And so, that combined with NR 103 is another thing that's on the plate of the proposer, in this case the city, as to what is required to show that all the water quality standards will be satisfied. That's an undefined term within the law, and that has a potential for causing contention at the approval criteria, and then potentially delays, asking the DNR for hearings and et cetera, and so on down the road. So it'd be better to, again, have some kind of guidance there as to what that means, even from Tim at the DNR. So the other questions that I have surround the approval process, and I was wondering if somebody could walk me through what happens from this point forward in terms of this. So you get a vote here to recommend approval from this committee, then what?
Yeah. So after we get the committee recommendation, the intention would be to, from this committee, the intention would be to send it out to our other committees, if after we make any necessary revisions, with so far there's not any, if any, but send it out to other committees for their comments. It'll probably before that, we're gonna have a presentation. We're planning to have a presentation at the Plan Commission at, I think, one of the upcoming Plan Commission meetings without action. So it'd be presentation and discussion, and then the rest of the process would be getting comment, well, the council refers it out, we get comments from our committees and commissions, incorporate that, then we have a public hearing at Plan Commission, and that's a 30-day notice before that happens, and then we'll have a public hearing at council, another 30-day notice, and that's, the idea is that that would be the adoption meeting, assuming council's okay with the plan as it is.
So we don't need any discussion about your answer, I just want an answer. So will this be adopted as an amendment to the comprehensive plan by the Plan Commission?
Yeah. Appendix, it'll be adopted as an appendix to the comprehensive plan.
So there's a distinction here. Will it be adopted as an amendment to the master plan
by
the Plan Commission?
The future land use map will.
Will this be amended, adopted as? So you're saying no? We can discuss.
It'll be included in the comp plan as an appendix. It'll be an appendix of the comp
So
plan.
will the elements be enforceable?
Yes.
Will it be adopted by the Plan Commission as an amendment to the master plan?
The comp plan, yeah.
Okay, because I noticed that is not the case on other ones that I've looked at. The Plan Commission says it's compatible and approves it, but actually does not adopt an amendment, and there's a difference. That's enough discussion here. I don't need to waste it to take any more time, but that's an issue I'll get in touch with you. And so that's my other issue is with regard to some of the processes that surround the way that the comprehensive plan is used. But anyway, thank you. And again, I think that everybody needs to be aware that there are people in the community that are looking more broadly at the impacts, particularly in areas where there have already been impacts. And these are the environmental laws that do require the city to step up and provide proactively information from the cities in as to the non-impact of what's being proposed. So just so everybody's aware, thanks.
Can you clarify which water body we're talking
So
about?
it's that whole complex down there along Fitchburg. So it's Goose Lake and all these other things. So they're really low wetlands, and they've been inundated, not just lately, but over a very long time period, with volumes of stormwater. And because it's a lowland, it doesn't drain, and everything tends to stay in there. The water quality's been improving because of the stormwater things that have been put in there, but all the development is really pushing a lot of water into an area that has very little slope, and in theory, should be better quality wetlands than what they are.
Mm-hmm. And as I heard in a different meeting today, further slowed down right now because there's some beaver activity in there. That's,
imagine that. Who would have thought? And it's an interesting, there's already too much water, right? I get it. So.
Just a comment, or maybe there's a question built in here somewhere, but on the sort of enforceability, from my perspective, the most critical aspect of enforceability, and the only part that's really truly subject to the consistency requirement of state law, is the future land use map. And so that piece is going to be, like the core of the comprehensive plan will be amended.
Thank you for adding that clarification. Yep.
I didn't get your name. David Haight. David Haight, H-A-I-G-H-T. I live at 5855 Woods Edge Road. Thanks. You.
Do either of you want to speak? Okay. committee feels ready, I think we could consider a recommendation.
I would recommend that we move it forward.
Do you need a second?
Sure, let's do it. Let's do
Are
Robert's
we doing
rules.
formal or not formal? Informal.
Are you seconding? Okay. All right, I guess everyone in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Hearing none. It will move forward in the process. Next step to the Planning Commission. So, thank you, everyone. This has been a long process and it's been a lot of information, but I think we got a good workable plan out of it. So.
And I just want to extend my thanks to everyone who's been involved in all the time and some controversy, and I really do appreciate all of your efforts and comments. And Brad and I will keep you informed of all the next steps, and so you're welcome to join me in the meetings, and I just want to say thanks to everyone.
Thank you too for listening and for being creative.
Thank you.
It's easy to take models and just move with them. It's harder to think out of the box. So this one you needed to.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. Well, thanks again, everyone. Have a good night.
Yeah.
We actually got done a little earlier than I thought.
Bought some time for everybody too. Win-win right there.